When I read the lectionary selection for this week, I was immediately struck by how difficult Jesus' instructions are here. As a matter of fact, I believe that this is one of the most difficult chapters in all the Bible. It's disturbing to us. Not disturbing like the sacrifice of Isaac, where Abraham is about to sacrifice his beloved son to God. Not disturbing as in theologically difficult to understand or interpret like many passages in the book of Revelation. As a matter of fact, this chapter is so disturbing because of how easy it is to understand. How frank it is on what we are supposed to do. And how we can very honestly look at this chapter and look at our lives and just say, we don't want to do this. This part of the book of Luke has been called the Sermon on the Plain because it's similar in structure to the much longer Sermon on the Mount that we find in Matthew 5-7. The first part of the sermon, the first part of Luke chapter 6, before our reading for today, it dealt with the relationship of the disciples to God. But this second half is the more difficult half, because this is all about the disciples' relationship to other people. And it's within this second part of the chapter, this second part of the sermon, that Jesus mentions 7 different aspects of unconditional love. And he brings these out because these actions are not done naturally by human nature. They require supernatural enabling. And thus, Jesus says, they are proof of true righteousness. Because you cannot do these things on your own, but only through the love and the strength of God. He tells the disciples to love their enemies. Now, the Old Testament specifically commanded love of neighbor, but no one had ever gone so far as to say that you have to just not love your neighbor, but you have to love your enemies as well. To do good to those who hate you, to bless those who curse you, to pray for those who mistreat you. He tells them then that they are not to retaliate when they are abused, that they are not to strike back. In fact, he tells them if you are struck on the right cheek, turn and offer the left also. The blow on the right cheek was the most grievous insult that could be given in the ancient Near East. Countries would go to war over such a gesture. People would die over such a gesture. And so when Jesus says if you are struck on the right cheek, you are to turn and offer them the left instead. To show a willingness to let go, to forgive, and not to retaliate. He tells them to give freely and to treat others the way that they want to be treated. He then taught his followers a fundamental principle of the universe. What one sows, he will reap. You know, it's funny, in spirituality today, we often hear about karma. And what you give comes back to you, and getting what you deserve. And all these things are just an extension of this ancient truth that Jesus taught here in the New Testament. What one sows, he will reap. Mercy will lead to mercy. And Jesus tells his disciples that they were to have the same merciful attitude that Jesus displayed toward them. He tells them that if they are quick to judge others, that they will receive judgment in return. If they are quick to condemn others, they will receive condemnation in return. But instead, if they love, if they pardon, if they give, then they will receive all of those things in return. I once read a story where a reporter was interviewing a man on his 100th birthday. And he asked the man, he said, "What are you most proud of?" And the man said, "Well, I'm proud of the fact that I don't have an enemy in the world." "How inspirational," the reporter said. "What a beautiful thought." Just as the centenarian finished, "Yep, outlived every one of them." Here in the midst of these very uncomfortable verses from Jesus, we find perhaps the most famous passage in all the Bible. Verse 31, and it's another one of those verses that almost commands being read in the King James. "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." This is what we have come to call the Golden Rule. It's been stitched into embroidery for samplers and pillows and wall hangings. It's been carved into statues and monuments, quoted in sermons and speeches. It is considered one of the defining teachings of Christianity. But interestingly, you'll find some version of the Golden Rule in nearly every major world religion. But there's a little twist. And so I want to share with you a few of these others. In Judaism, the Babylonian Talmud says, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow." In Islam, it's "do not oppress as you do not like to be oppressed." Hinduism says one should never do that to another which one regards as injurious to oneself. Buddhism says hurt not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful. Now, it's a bit subtle, but in most of other world religions, the variation of the Golden Rule that we find is in the negative. Don't hurt others because you don't want to be hurt. And yet Jesus pushed it even farther than that. He said it's not enough to not hurt others, but instead that we should do good for others, to show them the same kindness and forgiveness that we would want shown to us. And of course, the most vivid example we have for this is in the sacrament of Holy Communion that we will be celebrating in a few minutes. That sacrament, that act that showed Jesus, where Jesus literally showed us how far he was willing to go to show his love for us. How far he was willing to go to forgive us. That he was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for each and every one of us. The ultimate sacrifice, the ultimate example of loving those who do you harm, your enemies. If Jesus could hang upon that cross and ask God to forgive those who put him there, how can we possibly hold on to any lesser anger, any lesser grudge? Now, I don't know anyone's private circumstances. I don't know what's going on in anyone's hearts this morning, but I'm willing to bet that there is more than one person here today that needs to forgive. And I'm willing to bet that there's also more than one person here today that needs to be forgiven in return. as we prepare ourselves for Holy Communion. I invite you to reflect on the forgiveness shown to you and let you decide who in your life needs to be forgiven in turn.